Mr. Mayor, you got the note from Matt that he might not be on today?
Oh, that's correct, yes.
It was kind of, he thought almost, he had the email was worded that he was pretty sure he wasn't, but he might be on. So I was just going to look at the folks who are on, and I don't see him, so I'm assuming that he did not make it.
Yep, so he may be joining us later, but yeah, you're right. He was indicated he was going to be off, so.
Right.
Okay, well, why don't I'll call the Tuesday, September 15, 2020 meeting to order and ask Nicole to take roll call, please.
Carberry Montgomery.
Here.
Obrecht.
Here.
Hoagie.
Here.
Russell.
Here.
And Blake is absent at this time.
Okay, thank you. Item 2 is presentations. We do have a proclamation for Welcoming Week. Nicole, do you have that to post? I can read that. Thank you. So I'd like to read this. Whereas Welcoming Week is hosted by Welcoming America and is an annual series of events in which communities bring together immigrants and birthright citizens in a spirit of unity, building strong connections across their communities and affirming the benefits of welcoming everyone as equal members in the community. And whereas Urbandale is home to residents of all backgrounds, and those new residents are a vital part of our community. To capitalize on diversity as an asset, Urbandale must strive to create a culture that ensures everyone belongs and can thrive. That includes addressing disparities, countering hate, understanding history, and helping neighbors come together. And whereas regardless of where we were born or how we identify we are Urbandale residents, and our lives are interdependent, it is time to come together and build a community where every resident has the opportunity to thrive and contribute. By fostering a welcoming environment for all, regardless of immigration status, race, ethnicity, place of origin, English language proficiency, religion, income, gender, sexual orientation, differing abilities, age, and other factors, we enhance Urbandale's health, economic prosperity, and well-being for current and future generations. And whereas Urbandale, along with several other community partners, is joining Welcoming Week efforts led by the Greater Des Moines Partnership. So now, therefore, I, Robert Andoig, Mayor of the City of Urbandale, do hereby proclaim September 13 through September 20 to be Welcoming Week in Urbandale. And I encourage all residents to celebrate our diverse heritage and our culture, and to continue our efforts to create a community that is just, compassionate, and equitable for all. So with that, I'm proud to sign that proclamation and to present that for Welcoming Week this week. And there is also the equity challenge that I believe United Way is sponsoring, and I know a number have signed up, and I think we've also sponsored that as a city as well. So with that, we will move on to item 3, is to approve the agenda for today's meeting. I'll ask for a motion in a second.
So move.
Okay, motion by Russell, second by Carberry Montgomery. Discussion, roll call.
Russell.
Yes.
Carberry Montgomery.
Yes.
Obrecht.
Yes.
Hoagie.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. That passes. Item 4 is our regular agenda. First is 4.1, the Westcom Strategic Plan presentation. And AJ, did you want to introduce who we have with us today?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members of council, today, as the mayor mentioned, is our Westcom Strategic Plan presentation. Westcom is the communication component of the public safety communication link for police, fire, and EMS in the 3 cities of Urbandale, Clive, and West Des Moines as original developers of the system. And for subscribers to the system, we have had on for a couple of years the city of Waukee and the city of Norwalk. It is an independent operation, although it's currently under the umbrella of the city of West Des Moines, but effectively operates independently to provide those 24-hour a day, 7-day-a-week communication services. With us today, we have Westcom Chief Darin Riney and Westcom Board Chairman Matt McQuillen, who also is the current city manager of the city of Clive. Those gentlemen are here today to present the recent strategic plan development for Westcom as they move into the future, and how it will involve the city of Urbandale and the other set cities that are covered by this program. So I would like to turn it over to, I think, Matt. If you're online, I'll turn it over to you first, and then make your introductions, and then take off the program from there.
All right. Thank you, AJ. Can you guys hear me all right and see the screen okay?
Yep, just fine.
All right, perfect. Well, as AJ said, I'm Matt McQuillen. I'm the city manager for the city of Clive, but in that capacity, I also serve as the chair of the Westcom Management Committee, and have served in that role since January 2018, where my predecessor, Denny Henderson, who was the city manager in our community, was the original board chair for the founding of Westcom a number of years ago. We're excited today to bring forward to you an annual update that we like to do, and Westcom Chief Riney is with me as well, and he'll go through the balance of this presentation. So we like to do this annual update, but particularly for this update, we want to share with you a new strategic plan that Westcom as an organization has been working on over the past year. And this is exciting for us because Westcom really has never done a strategic planning effort, really looking at what's the next evolution of this collaboration amongst the 5 cities and potentially more into the future for this public safety answering point that we have here at Westcom. So we're really excited to share that with you. I know some of those materials were included in your agenda packet for this meeting, specifically the strategic planning document that lays out a number of items, aggressive targets, I would say, where we want to take Westcom in the future. And I'll turn it over to Chief Riney here in a moment to walk through the balance of the presentation, but I want to at least share my appreciation for both of your chiefs, Chief Rob and Chief Holt, related to the amount of time that they spent on the various committees and groups that we had for the strategic planning effort. They serve on the Westcom Management Committee for you, and really appreciate their time, and want to offer an opportunity at the end of any comments they may have in terms of the process that we went through. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chief Riney to walk through the presentation. Chief?
Excellent. Thank you, Matt. And also thank you, Mayor and Council, for inviting us and letting us share some information with you today. AJ covered a lot of the information in his little introduction there. Westcom actually came about in January of 2001. So this coming January, it'll be a 20-year celebration for what's been brought together initially by the city of West Des Moines, Clive, and Urbandale. Like I said, AJ covered a lot of it, so thankfully that's going to save me from having to do some of the history on speaking on this. We've completed our first strategic planning process and established some aggressive goals to continue to move Westcom forward and to better serve the cities, responders, and the public that we serve. While we're here to present the strategic plan to the mayor and council, we wanted to give you an update on our current events and how the COVID pandemic has affected our cities from our perspective here at Westcom. Starting with the police statistics, you see the city of Urbandale in the light blue, or Carolina blue if you prefer, comparing the first 6 months of 2019 to the same time frame of this year. Chief Johansson and his team were down by about 30% compared to that of the same time frame from last year. Those numbers are somewhat skewed because the numbers are off considerably more during the months of March, April, and May during that initial onset of COVID. For the same time frame for the fire and EMS departments, Chief Holt and his crews were just about at the same call volume compared to last year. It's been pretty average for the fire and EMS departments that we serve. Interesting thing with these numbers is that for the months of March, April, and May, the majority of all the departments that we dispatch for were down by over 30% in comparison between the 2 years. Westcom, for example, in April, May, and June of this year was at 35% less call volume than normal. And since things have started to reopen and people are moving about again, we've returned to being with about 5% off our normal call volume. And we're still going to expect to surpass last year's numbers, even with the decline that we've seen. The month of April versus the month of August was a difference of nearly 6,000 calls just between those 2 months. The Iowa hurricane that blew through late last month will lend a hand to surpassing last year's numbers. That one-day call volume saw 2.5 times our normal average, with over 1,200 calls being handled within that 24-hour period for the single day. With the reduction of some of the calls, that is also readjusted where the calls are occurring. For all jurisdictions, some of the call types that we've seen a large decrease in are traffic-related. Traffic accidents alone are down by over 500 in just March, April, and May. On the other side of the spectrum, we've seen an increase in calls that were categorized as nuisance or noise complaints. These were directly related to complaints of large gatherings of people or people out and about that didn't feel they should be because of COVID. Some impressive numbers across our area are in the population growth numbers between the last census to the projected numbers for 2020. All cities in our service area have grown over the past 10 years, anywhere from nearly 10% in Clive to almost 90% in Waukee. Obviously, that does impact the city's cost share for Westcom services, as that funding is based on population. Current rate for the cities works out to be about $27.50 per resident per year. And comparing that to the other areas, those numbers aren't the easiest to compile, as each state has different metrics and standards for reporting. Two most recent reports providing that information shows Colorado's current rate is $45 and Michigan coming in at $47.50. And both of those are strictly for 911 service only and not utilized to support the responders through technology or systems, as is the current model with Westcom. While we hear that Westcom is expensive, based on the shared cost model and how Westcom is utilized as a pass-through for shared systems and expenses for all the agencies, we're still considered being efficient for what we are doing. Iowa actually stopped producing their similar report to this back in 2017. Anyway, some interesting numbers, but onto the strategic plan recently completed. Westcom released an RFP for the first strategic plan for the department and received interest from 17 different vendors. Those were narrowed down to 5 consultants to interview, and the one being chosen being BDS Planning and Urban Design. They've been working with Westcom and the cities over the past several months to complete the project, and we're very pleased to present the final product to you. Many hours have been spent in looking at the departments and how it functions. A specialist on 911 systems and services was utilized and made recommendations, and numerous interviews and observations were made with our responding agencies and the cities. Recommendations were made and goals were developed to continue to move Westcom forward as an agency and also in the services that we provide. 3 main focuses of the goals include the structure and makeup of Westcom and the management committee that oversees us, the set level of service and expectations for Westcom, and a roadmap for the future for planning and development as an agency. Through this plan, we have some aggressive goals as a department, and all of them consider the needs and desires of our partner agencies and communities to ensure that we continue to provide the needed services at the needed expectations and levels. With that, we'll entertain any questions or comments, and I'll turn it back over to Matt. I believe he's got some closing thoughts on this. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Chief. Yeah, as you can see, and I'll jump back to a slide here, just in terms of some of the big goals. The independent organization. So the current functionality of the system is it is a 2080 agreement where the city of West Des Moines serves as the operating contractor for the relationship. And so essentially the Westcom staff, our city of West Des Moines staff, all of our finances are operated separately and separated out, but that is kind of their current makeup. And so there is a desire amongst all the communities, including West Des Moines, to see, okay, what does that look like in terms of an independent organization going forward? Westcom is a sizable operation, very sizable operation, and that can be a burden sometimes on the operating contractor. And so what does that look like for Westcom to look like an independent organization in the future? We know that under at least Iowa code at this point, there isn't necessarily specific code language that allows us to do this. So this is something more we're going to be pursuing over the next few years of researching, understanding what that could look like of having a truly independent organization for Westcom. And so more to come on that, but that is a very big target, knowing that there might need to be some legislative action associated with that at some point in the future. And I think as all the communities continue to grow in the Westcom system, and with the potential of new communities joining on at some point in the future, growth is first and foremost in our minds, and how we maintain our service expectations of the member agencies while the growth is continuing. And knowing that at some point the facility that we currently have is not going to be able to hold the staff that we need to serve all the growing communities. And so we're really just trying to be proactive and stay ahead of a lot of these big issues, and making sure also that we can be sharing this information to all the member communities in terms of the potential investments that would be needed in the future. One thing that doesn't show on the screen is some technology work that we're doing, as well as kind of a technology master plan, and looking at the evolution of our CAD system and whether or not we could look at a cloud-based network system and something that would be a little bit more independent and not dependent on one city's particular network system. As many of you know, we dealt with some challenges in the last year related to that, that came to the forefront, that we're looking at how do we mediate and mitigate those issues going forward. So that's also another thing that's kind of embedded in some of these more detailed, granular items related to the goals. So and in addition to the chiefs that helped out, AJ, as well as Mayor Andewig, we had some engagement with all of the mayors and the city managers throughout this process as well. And so really appreciate the time that was given. But with that, I just wanted to kind of give a general summary there. I wanted to offer, at least if the chiefs, either Chief Johansson or Chief Holt, had any comments that they would like to say just on behalf of the process that we went through for this strategic plan. Chiefs?
I don't really have anything to add. It was a good process that reached out and included all the people that it needed to include. The only thing that I think is a high priority that we need to be working on is the redundancy of the system that we've all talked about. Since we had our failure back in December, one of our goals is to get that up and running so that if that happens again, we have a redundant system that we can turn on and get going relatively quickly. I certainly appreciate Chief Riney and Matt's work in this. I know it's a lot of hard work went into putting everything together, and they've done a great job.
Yeah, I also thought the process was very well received by the group. An important process. The consultants did a really nice job of tying everything together, because the vision for Westcom is very all-encompassing. One of the main things that I would like to bring to everybody's attention is that the facility discussion needs to happen probably sooner than later, as Westcom is bursting at the seams with their current facility location already. So I talked to AJ about this a little bit. So it needs to probably be included on the CIP planning process to get at least some ballpark numbers in there for facility needs for Westcom in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you, Chiefs. And, with that, appreciate those comments, and be happy to take any comments or questions from the mayor and council, or AJ, if anything that you wanted to say as well.
Matt, this is AJ, and just because we have 3 new council members this year, and I'm sure they're familiar conceptually with Westcom, and that is our dispatch system, if you could talk a little bit about the interactiveness that we have with not only the city of Des Moines, with Polk County, because the bulk of our population hits Polk and Dallas County for our participating cities, and then the cities that we have other relationships with for mutual aid and or assistance that, almost probably all of our fire departments have assisted Des Moines at some point. Police boundaries get kind of, they melt a little bit when you're in pursuit or you're asked to provide some assistance, but communication is always a key factor there. So if you could just touch on some of those issues, and there's obviously there's some consensus, but there is not some consensus. And I see Supervisor Brownell on the line, and certainly I just wanted to, so for our new council members, we have various systems out there that we try to interact with.
So yeah, no, I'd be happy to jump in on that. So within Polk County, or we'll call it the metro area, we have 3 major PSAP locations: Polk County, Des Moines, and Westcom, and Supervisor Brownell serves as the chair of the 911 board for Polk County. And there's been a lot of things happening. I think one thing I wanted to mention is BDS, who worked with us on our strategic plan, is also working on a strategic plan with the 911 board. And Supervisor Brownell, I don't know if you wanted to speak a little bit to that process and some of the things that we're working on at a county level.
Sure. And I've got the cities I represent, I've got my feet in both camps. I've got Urbandale and Clive, Westcom, and everybody else is in Polk County, which has presented some opportunities and some challenges. You know, we started Westcom 20 years ago. There was 17 different dispatch stations around and PSAPs, and now there's just 3, and a whole generation of people have come and gone since then. And so now people are saying, well, why is there 3? So that's one of the things BDS is tackling is, should we have one consolidated dispatch center? What would that look like? Should we be dealing with one single CAD system, one single radio system? Some of those kind of questions. So those are all under advisement. We did get some feedback, a lot of feedback actually, from first responders from each PSAP. That includes law enforcement, fire and ambulance, EMS, from Westcom, from Polk County, their clients, and also Des Moines. So I've met with everybody that discussed that feedback, and there was kind of a common theme there with that. Feedback came to us, and I had a meeting with Matt and Darin last Friday, I think, Matt, and we discussed the feedback we got, and a lot of it dealt with you guys don't have any performance standards. You don't have any measurements. You don't measure anything. And a lot of that's misperception, because Westcom does measure, as you can see some of the graphs I have out there. But what a lot of the first responders think is that it's not measured, but it is. And there are standards, there are national standards for measurement. And nobody's saying that you're going to get your funds cut off if you don't meet your standards, but I'd like to see some consistent standards across the board, across all 3 PSAPs being measured, and people know what they are, and then we can measure if we're improving or not. So those are some of the things BDS is working on with us, and the feedback was all pretty good. I guess there's 2 things. One of them is we're serving the public. We want it, that's part of our mission statement, is to serve the public and also the first responders. To the public, it all looks pretty good. You call 911, you get a police car, you get an ambulance, you get a fire truck, and competent people are inside. So the public feels like it's going good. And 911, we see the warts, and there aren't a lot, but there are some. And a lot of it has to do with interoperability and communication between different agencies. And so we're trying to work our way through those things and not put too many Band-Aids on it, because when you get invested in the Band-Aids, that's all you end up investing in is Band-Aids. So we're trying to put together a long-term vision, and that's why we hired BDS. I think it's going to come out well. Response from all 3 PSAPs has been very positive. Surprised me a little bit, frankly. And so I think we're going to get somewhere. But anyway, that's kind of where we are with the strategic plan in 911 right now.
I could add on to Supervisor Brownell's comments too. I think a big evolution that is happening right now, or in the midst of happening, is the city of Des Moines made a decision to join in on the state radio system with Motorola, and so they're actually converting their entire system over to the same radio system that Westcom is on. So in terms of AJ's comments related to interoperability, particularly with the city of Des Moines, that is going to become even more seamless now, where we can hear traffic and the first responders. It's even more. There was an ability to do it before, but now it's even more seamless, and that proved benefits to us back when we were dealing with some challenges last December, where because the dispatch center in Des Moines was on that radio system already, we were able to do some things where we could send a dispatcher down to Des Moines and able to run some things that we weren't able to do at the moment due to some network challenges. And so that's already paid off for us, and I think will continue to pay off in the future. And then we'll see how that evolves, whether it transitions to CAD systems and other systems that we utilize to have that more seamless interoperability, as maybe we get these systems tied together. And this is something Supervisor Brownell and I have talked about a lot, is getting these systems tied together. And then it's easier to have a conversation about what does our PSAP arrangement look like in this county over the next 10 to 20 years.
So a quick question for the group is, has there been any conversation about each other's organizations between Polk County and Westcom being the backups for each other? We talked about the redundancy. Is that part of the process?
Well, I'll answer that, Adam. That has been part of the feedback we got, meetings that we were taking with Westcom, Des Moines, and Polk County. That is something that we want to do. And Chief Holt mentioned that from the malware attack late last year on Westcom, we weren't able to just substitute a bunch of chairs out. And so that's part of where the long-term vision of where we want to go is that you can sub out different PSAPs for different areas. Easier said than done, because right now the operating procedures are different between all three PSAPs. So operating procedures need to be standardized. Some of this is kind of in the weeds, but there's stuff like that needs to get done first. And people are on board; they want to do it. And I can just tell you that the Urbandale is part of a system called Closest Unit Response with the City of Clive, which is cutting edge, next level response, service level kind of stuff that's going on right now. It really works well. And it's just been tremendous benefit for the citizens of Urbandale and Clive. We can't do that between Urbandale and Johnston, for example, which everybody wants to do because the CADs don't match up. And we want to be able to get to this closest unit response as soon as we can because it really helps. But those are the kind of things, Adam, that we're trying to line up in a long-term position so that we can address some of these kind of falling short. To the public, it looks pretty good. But, inside the system, it looks like, there could be a lot of improvements, and I think there can.
To make a quick plug as the Clive City Manager on the closest unit response relationship that we have between our communities, I think Westcom has made that very seamless for us. That was merely the chiefs having to do some reconfigurations of the CAD to make that work, and I think that's paid off very well for both communities. I hope you all feel the same way that our council does. And a plug for that too is I know we're looking at the late afternoon of October 8th as a date for a groundbreaking for our new public safety facility here in Clive, the old Slumberland site at 8800 Hickman Road that will also continue to serve the city of Urbandale as well as a part of our closest unit response system. And then having you all invited to that. So I know that's we've been working on those dates. So I wanted to kind of throw that out there. I know Mayor and AJ, we've been going back and forth, but looking at that late afternoon on October 8th to do that groundbreaking. And we want to welcome you all to that, just like you did for Station 43. And that, again, arrangements like Westcom allow us to do those kinds of collaborations pretty seamlessly, which I'm very proud of.
Absolutely. Thanks, Matt. Any other further questions or comments? I just want to give a little history on my history and perspective on Westcom. I first ran for council in 1999, and that's when Westcom was first being discussed as a concept. And heard about this on the campaign trail, talking to people. Some folks were very concerned about giving up turf on each city having its own dispatch system, but I think it turned out to be very well. This is one of the first real successes of intergovernmental cooperation in the metro area. It was a leap of faith for all three cities to do it. It turned out very well because each city would have had to have invested millions of dollars in their own dispatch system, which didn't make sense. And so the three cities came together. We did a second phase of this about 10 years ago to continue it. And here we are again now 20 years later. We have subscribers on the system, and it's continuing forward, and it's providing a good service, and it's saving all of our residents money. So I think I just want to applaud where we've been and that we need to keep moving this forward. And it's a great example of how we can work together and serve all our residents together provide first-class service at a very competitive cost. I just saw something in the chat. Nikki had a question about, I don't know if you see this, can someone give a little expanded info on the goal related to becoming independent by 2025? Does this infer ability to levy taxes, or what is meant by independent?
No, I'd be happy to answer that. Yeah, Your Honor. No, we don't see at this time, we don't see the financial model changing at all. It's a population-based funding model, which has worked well for us in this arrangement here. We made some changes to that a number of years ago and got to a more stable place with using population. I don't necessarily see that changing. I think the independent nature of it would be is there's times where we feel as an organization we could be a little bit more nimble as Westcom. Whether it's kind of related to HR issues or finance or things like that, that if we had kind of more direct control of that, IT is another one under the Westcom umbrella. And you know, we kind of end up being sometimes a burden or a bolt on for West Des Moines, the city of West Des Moines. And they acknowledge this as well, that we might need to have some more flexibility than they're able to provide at certain times. Again, not a fault of either organization. It's just something that we recognize during the strategic planning process. So I see that being more the independent nature of what's the governance model look like and evolving into. This was a conversation a topic we had quite a bit of conversation about, is the current setup of the management committee, that there's a desire, we need to see that to evolve, and the governance of Westcom evolve into different models. One thing that we're looking at is kind of creating a more of an executive committee, maybe potentially of city managers or mayors or some combination thereof. That is a smaller group that really focuses more on maybe the long-term strategic and major financial decisions of the organization, and then keep the focus on operations and the needs of the frontline responders with the chiefs. So there's this kind of an evolution happening here, and so that independent means a lot of different things, but at this point in time, we don't see a need or a desire to have some kind of independent levying authority, that we would stick with more of a population funding model where each member community city council still has the final say on the budget.
All right, thanks, Matt. Any further questions or comments before we move on? All right, well, thanks. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Chief, and good information. And we look forward to the next evolution of Westcom and continuing forward. So thank you.
Thank you all.
All right, moving on to item 4.2, the work session follow-up regarding the Urbandale Police Department and our CALIA policy. AJ, I'll turn it back over to you. Start.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, thank you, members of council. After all of our discussions that we took place this summer, I shouldn't say all of them, our listening session and our follow-up work session, council identified those areas that they wanted to specifically look at to continue the discussion on race and diversity in our community, and in ways that you as a city council and we as a city can make those changes and make this a better environment concerning those two very important topics. All along in our discussion, we've always talked about activity falls within the Urbandale Police Department. And given all the events that have taken place in 2020, almost exclusively events have been precipitated by police departments throughout the country. And that those have generated all the activity that is associated there afterwards. And certainly, you know, as a community that provides law enforcement services, it's something that I know you as a council, the mayor, myself, the chief, and all of our employees, we're very focused on providing the best level of service that we can in a fair and equitable manner to all of our residents and visitors that come to our community. So following, as we went from the listening session to our work session, again, during those time periods, a number of times the terminology CALIA and how that applies to the Urbandale Police Force came up in discussions. And there was some information provided by Chief Johansson earlier in this discussion about kind of a real quick Reader's Digest version, if you will, about what CALIA was and some of the programs and activities that are in play that we felt were very important from keeping us out of that conversation for conversations that get involved with departments that do things beyond the boundaries of where they should be doing things. And so, again, as we go through this process of identifying, you've already identified the goals, but to elaborate on those goals and those target areas, we will be bringing back to you periodically in this format at the Lunch and Learn for discussion and informational and update purposes items on that list. And I thought the most important item to bring up is CALEA because it deals with the police department. And quite honestly, by the very nature of its setup, it is a department that runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Our officers are on the street. They have a tremendous amount of discretionary authority when it comes to enforcing the laws of the land, if you will. And again, I don't want to make it sound, get into what the chief will be explaining to you, but this is the department that really, if from a national perspective, what we've seen in the national news and other communities, this is the department through their actions or inactions and how they conduct themselves professionally in enforcement of law, in the law enforcement environment, certainly can provide reasons for you to be proud and to celebrate, and also reasons for you as a council to have real concerns about. And so I think it's real important as we continue this discussion that the chief does give you this overview of CALEA and what it does for us, and the importance of having this in play when we look not only at today's events, but into the future. And so, again, I want to make sure that the chief has plenty of time to review, answer your questions, and then we can go from there. But Mr. Mayor, at this time, I'd like to turn the programming over to Police Chief Rob Johansson.
All right. Thanks, Chief. The floor is yours.
Okay, Mayor, members of council, I do have a PowerPoint presentation that I'll walk through here, and the first part of it's going to talk about what CALEA is, kind of the breakdown, just a little more detail so everybody's kind of on the same page on what CALEA is and how it works. And then the second part of this will be, how does this apply to the social justice issues that we've been discussing? So if I can get this PowerPoint up and working here, make sure that Nicole is sharing. Are you able to see that first slide?
Not yet, Rob.
Not yet.
Okay. Nicole, are you sharing the screen?
Rob, I'll have you click on the share on your, you have it pulled up on yours.
Okay. Oops. How do I do that on here on this end? Share, just hit the share button. There we go. I got it, I think. Let's see if this works.
Perfect, we see it now.
How about now? Are you seeing the entire slide or the other one? The one that shows two slides?
We're seeing the two slides.
Okay, let me flip it around here.
There we go.
Now? There we go. Okay, sorry that took so long. All right, so CALEA, obviously the acronym CALEA stands for the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies. That's where we're starting today. CALEA started back in 1979. The commission was created as a credentialing authority through the joint efforts of law enforcement agencies, executive associations, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, the National Sheriff's Association, and the Police Executive Research Forum. That's how CALEA was born, if you will, way back in 1979. So CALEA has been around for quite a while. And for those of us that were around at the time, you can see the most popular model of car there was the Smokey and the Bandit, 1979 Trans Am. Very important piece of history there. The CALEA is governed by a commission board composed of 21 members. By mandate, the board allows for 11 law enforcement practitioners with a balance selected from public and private sector. Current non-law enforcement members include a city councilman, a senator, a circuit court judge, a Supreme Court judge retired, a city manager, and a college professor. So as you can see, the commission that creates these standards is very diverse, comes from a lot of different areas, not just law enforcement personnel. CALEA maintains a professional staff managed by an executive director. The staff conducts all the administrative and operational duties as directed by the commission. CALEA operates as an independent, nonprofit 501c3 corporation. It is not part of or beholden to any government entity. Fees are paid by public safety agencies that defray the commission's major operating costs. The commission's authority is derived solely from the voluntary participation of public safety agencies in the accreditation program. CALEA requires an agency to develop a comprehensive, well thought out set of written directives. Written directives can be policies, procedures, rules and regulations, general orders, a variety of different things. This is a successful method for reaching administrative and operational goals while also providing direction to personnel. CALEA accreditation standards provide the necessary reports and analysis needed to make fact-based informed management decisions. CALEA accreditation means, sorry, lost my place here. CALEA accreditation is a means for developing or improving agency relationships within the community. Accreditation embodies the precepts of community-oriented policing. It creates a forum in which law enforcement agencies and citizens work together to prevent and control challenges confronting the community and provide clear direction about community expectations. And this is a shot of our National Night Out event, if you didn't recognize it. CALEA accreditation can limit agency and officer liability and risk exposure. Accreditation demonstrates internationally recognized standards for law enforcement that have been met as verified by a team of independent CALEA-trained assessors. So I got a little clip here. So who is accredited?
I see we have a question. Yeah, I'm sorry, maybe you already answered this. Why exactly are we here? Son? Second Lieutenant Jake Jensen, West Point, graduate with honors. We're here because you're looking for the best of the best of the best, sir. What's so funny, Edwards? Boy, Captain America over here. Best of the best of the best, sir. With honors. Yeah, he's just really excited and he has no clue why we're here.
So it's just a little clip I think of when we think about the best of the best. So currently in Iowa, when you're talking about accredited agencies, this is the list. You can see it's pretty short when you think about the Iowa having 99 county sheriff's offices and 948 cities in the state. The list of CALEA accredited agencies is pretty small. When it shows in self-assessment, that is agencies that are not accredited yet, but are in the process. I know Clive went through their on-site assessment, their initial on-site assessment in June. And so they're also awaiting the commission's notice in November of whether they actually be accredited or not. And I would also mention that Westcom, as part of the strategic planning process, has identified CALEA accreditation as a goal for the department and have started work in that direction as well. Approximately 4% of the police agencies in the United States are CALEA accredited. There are other options for some agencies, as some states have their own accreditation system. It's a state level accreditation, but Iowa obviously does not have that available. A recent executive order on safe policing for safe communities from President Trump ties federal funding from the Department of Justice That would include the COPS grant. It ties that to being certified by a reputable, independent credentialing body certified by the Attorney General of the United States. CALEA meets that standard. So, in other words, agencies that are not accredited going forward will not be eligible for federal funding. So that's another reason why you're gonna see a big change, I think, in agencies jumping on board with either CALEA or other accrediting agents or accrediting entities, so they can qualify for federal funding. So Urbandale's history with accreditation started back in 2010 at the direction of Chief McCarty. That was one of his goals when he took over as chief of police. And I was tasked as a lieutenant at the time to take on the accreditation process and get the department policies and procedures and written directives up to snuff so we could become accredited. That's a 3-year process. So we worked through that, and our initial accreditation award was in 2013. We then continued our accreditation for the next 3 years, and were reaccredited in 2016. After 2016, CALEA actually changed their model from a 3-year model to a 4-year cycle. And that is where we get to the current day. Back in June, we had our second reaccreditation on site for our 4-year cycle. That was in June. We are waiting now, after going through that on-site assessment, we're waiting the commission meeting in November to decide whether or not we would be reaccredited. And I see no reason why we won't be. Our report that came back from our June on-site assessment was excellent in every way. The standards address 36 major law enforcement areas covering 484 standards. So if you look at our accreditation, because it's a little different for each agency depending on what you do. For example, if you do courthouse security, there's some standards that apply to courthouse security. If you do run a holding facility, there are standards that apply to you. So some of those don't apply. As you look through our numbers, you can see that we have to comply with 334 of their mandatory standards. We complied with 85 of their optional standards. The 3 elected 20% I'll get into that in just a little bit. There was 3 standards that we chose not to complete. We're allowed to do that by the CALEA process. And then there were 62 standards that weren't applicable to Urbandale because we just don't do that function. Water rescue, courthouse security, some standards like that we just don't do that function. Therefore, we don't have to comply with the standard. After our recent on-site assessment, we are moving to the 6th edition of CALEA's program manual, and it's going to drop us from 484. They've reworked all of the standards and combined some and did some different things with it. So now it's at 459 going forward. So the program that we're in has 459 total standards. There are 2 different programs that you can subscribe to as a CALEA member. You can do regular law enforcement accreditation, which is often referred to as Tier 1. That the only requirement of that is 181 of the standards, kind of the main standards, if you will, the ones that they feel are the most important. Urbandale actually participates in what is called advanced law enforcement accreditation, or Tier 2, and that's where the 459 standards come into play. The standards, just in general, from CALEA tell you what to do, but they don't tell you how to do it. They leave the how up to each agency because of otherwise they wouldn't be able to standardize that across all of the different sizes and geographic regions that CALEA covers. So the how is left up to the agency, but the what is prescribed by CALEA. Here's an example of a standard. This is an example of a very detailed standard, and it's the use of deadly force. And if you want to read through that, it talks very specifically about what needs to be in your written directive to comply with the standard. The commentary section, although you're not held to that, you're held to the written, the first part of the standard. The commentary just gives you a little bit of guidance on what they're trying to accomplish with the standard. So it gives you a good idea of what the assessors are going to be looking for when they come in. So this is an example of a very detailed standard. And here's an example of a very vague standard. Because every agency deploys different, less lethal weapons. They don't get very specific. They just state that you have to have a written directive that governs the use of and which ones are authorized for your department. So as you can tell, there's a big difference between some of these standards as far as how specific they are or how vague they are. And so when you have a standard, then the work comes in when you have to document your proof of compliance. So proof of compliance is a document, a photograph, a video. It can actually be an observance by the assessor or the compliance officer, or it can actually be an interview by the assessor of an employee if there is no documentation. I can tell you from experience that probably 95+% of this is proved through some type of paper document, photograph, or video. We rely less on observance and interview. It's just not very, just doesn't happen very often that we use either one of those, but they are options. Those proofs of compliance for the standards occur annually. So CALEA requires that you have a proof annually of every single standard that we talked about, the 459, previously 484. If a standard is bulleted, and I'll just pop ahead real quick here. This is an example of a bulleted standard. You can see it runs A through H. And unfortunately for the people that work in CALEA over here, a lot of the standards have bullets. So the bulleted standards have to be, each and every bullet has to be proofed annually. So in other words, if you're working on this standard for CALEA, you couldn't just provide one proof, one document. You have to provide one document for A, one document for B, one document for C, all the way through, and you have to do that each year. So every bulleted standard has to have a proof for each bullet. When you go through the 459 standards in the 6th edition, there's actually 1,168 proofs that have to be provided each and every year to the assessors and to the compliance officers to prove that we are meeting the CALEA standards. Again, back to this. Power DMS is a software that we use to manage the CALEA process. That software program is accessible by the compliance officers annually and also by the on-site assessors. That's how they go in and they look at our files and see our proofs of compliance for each and every standard that we have in there. It's a very detail-oriented program. Allows us to provide each proof, even for each one of these bulleted points. Also allows us to provide our written directives, our policies and procedures for review as well. So the entire process is managed through this software program called Power DMS. Again, proof of compliance annually on each and every bullet. Each year, a compliance officer gets into our files and reviews 25% of the standards. And then the next year, another 25% are done and another 25%. So when you get through your 4-year cycle, all of your files have been reviewed by a compliance officer for that 4-year cycle. The on-site assessor then goes through and notes any discrepancies or any problems that were noted during that 4-year cycle. And that's part of their review process. Once you have the on-site review, part of that process is again reviewing the 4 annual compliance officers reports. They review any lawsuits that the agency has been involved in during that 4-year cycle. They have a public comment section where the public is, before COVID, was able to come to the station or come to the city hall and make comment on the police department. In the new COVID world, it was actually just a call-in session where it was publicized, the number in which to call in if anybody in the community had any comments or questions or anything for the CLIA assessors. They took those written comments from the community or verbal comments. You can also write in comments to the on-site assessor or to the assessors. As part of the compliance review in that 4-year cycle of the on-site, we also submit all of our data. So the data that's submitted to them is our traffic warning and citations broken down by race and gender, our bias-based profiling complaints, all of our use of force data broken down by race and gender, any grievances filed by any employees during that 4-year cycle, any personnel actions taken by the department. That includes any of our written reprimands, verbal warnings, anything we did, any personnel action that we took, suspension, demotion, termination, that's all provided to the CLIA assessors. They review all of our citizens' complaints. They look at our calls for service numbers and where what types of areas we're having our calls for service. They examine our crime stats. So our UCR crime stats that we report to the federal government, they get all of that data as well. They review all of our vehicle pursuits. And then they also look at the makeup of our department personnel broken down by race and gender. For just officers or employees that are hired, and also our promotional processes. So they get a wealth of information from the department as part of that on-site assessment. It's not just the CLIA standards they're looking at. They're looking at all of that data as well. After a successful on-site, and then the report is written by the assessors and it's forwarded to the commission that we spoke about earlier for review and approval. So in November, when November rolls around, normally it's in person, but again, because of COVID, it will be a virtual conference. Myself and our CLIA manager, Lisa Godfrey, will be on a panel in front of the commission, at least a portion of the commission. They will go over the report and ask us any questions and answer any of their concerns. And then they'll make a decision on whether or not we will be approved for reaccreditation. After all that's completed, we just start all over again, and we start into the next year or the next cycle. So we just maintain compliance going forward. Now, I know that's probably more than you ever wanted to know about CLIA. And trust me, that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the intricacies of proofing these standards and all the things that we have to do to meet CLIA requirements. That being said, I'm going to take one more slide here, and then we'll take any questions, and then I'll go into the second part of this. So what does it all mean? It means that we're using model policies of the best practices in law enforcement. We have documented proof of compliance for each of those policies. Proof is verified by an independent accrediting body on an ongoing basis. And then just another number to throw at you. We currently have 113 policies in the police department that cover the CLIA standards and other operational activities that we do at the police department. So we have a very thick operations manual. Before we jump into the next section of this, I would just ask if there was any questions out there of the CLIA process. Not hearing anything, so I'll just go ahead and keep pushing forward on this. So as I went through our policies, and we're talking about potentially codifying some of this as a response to some of these social justice issues that have come up, I went through and I really thought, we have 113 policies over here. Most of them are very mundane, operational type policies, such as evidence collection, those types of things, vehicle operations, things like that really don't make a lot of sense to me. It makes sense to have a CLIA standard on them because obviously vehicle operations is a high liability area for a city, and having good policies and procedures in place on how our employees operate vehicles is important. But it's not important when it comes to social justice issues that we've been discussing. These are the 5 that I really think, if you really want to get down to the nuts and bolts of things, these are the 5 that I would say probably relate more to social justice than anything else in our operations manual and in the CLIA standards. If we just go through these real quick, our biggest one and probably the most important one, if we were ever to think about codifying a policy, is our bias-based profiling policy. This is the one where the meat's on the bone, if you will. This is the one that prohibits us from bias-based profiling based on race, ethnic background, gender, sexual orientation, religion, economic status, age, disability, political affiliation, national origin, or cultural group. It prohibits officers from taking law enforcement action based on information known to be motivated by bias. So in other words, if someone calls into us and complains about something and we know that to be based on some racially motivated problem that citizen had with another citizen, we wouldn't take action on that. It prohibits discriminatory pretextual traffic stops. It requires annual training on prevention of bias-based profiling. So that policy requires us to train annually to make sure that with all of our sworn personnel, to make sure that we're not doing any bias-based profiling. It allows the ability to file a complaint on bias that we've acted out of bias, or the department has, or an employee has, without intimidation or coercion, but to that person that's reporting it. It requires employees to report violations that they witness and protects them from retaliation. It requires an investigation of all of those types of complaints by our internal affairs unit. It requires an annual bias-based profiling report examining all the department's enforcement data. So we break down all the data every year and look at it, our traffic stops, our citations, our arrests, our forfeitures. There's 5 areas of enforcement that we look at every year. And then it also requires a diversity bias-based profiling instructor positions in the department to administer a proactive curriculum on bias-based profiling issues. So that's all kind of the highlights. There's more in that policy. It covers a lot. Those are just kind of a few of the highlights of that policy and that bias-based profiling policy. You jump to the next one. It's our use of force. It talks about reasonable force to accomplish lawful objectives. It defines reasonable force, and that comes right out of the Iowa Code. It talks about officers shall only use force when other viable options are exhausted or not practical. There's an emphasis throughout this policy on de-escalation. Officers are required to intervene and report if excessive force is witnessed by another officer. There's requirements for use of deadly force, again, as required by the Iowa Code. It bans chokeholds. It lays out all the parameters for the use and training requirements for our lethal and less lethal weapons, to include firearms, our chemical deterrent or pepper spray, a lot of people refer to it, our electronic control device, that's your taser, your extended range impact weapon, that's going to be your less lethal shotgun, or actually it's a 40 millimeter, that's your beanbag gun. And then you got your striking instruments, which we have all but done away with. The only striking instruments we have left are, we have some riot / batons that we use when we go out on incidents like that. Otherwise, officers do not carry striking instruments on a daily basis anymore. We retired them. anyway, the policy breaks down all the use and training and when the use of those things can be done. It requires us to provide medical attention to anyone that we use force against. Reporting requirements are also in there. We have a use of force report. For every time we use force, we have a use of our force report. It requires them to also fill out an incident report. That review is required to go through multiple levels, all the way up to the chief of police on every single use of force. And it requires an after-action review with the officers. So in other words, if an officer uses force, they're required to have a sit-down after-action review with a supervisor to discuss that use of force and explore any ways that we could have done it better, or could have de-escalated, or could have handled it any differently, as a way to learn from our incidents. And then it also requires an annual use of force analysis, where we break down our numbers. Where are we using force? Who's using force? How, why are we ending up in these situations? Is there a way we can get away from those types of things in that annual report? Another one that is important is our recruitment of personnel. So the recruitment policy, establishing our EEO hiring policies for the citywide. It actually refers to the city of Urbandale has EEO guidelines that we follow, not just the police department. It requires us to produce a recruitment plan every year. And then the objectives of that is to promote diversity within the department. And as I just popped in here, some of our performance measures. So you can see what our performance measures are for our recruitment plan is to increase female and minority applicants overall. And then also to get increase the number of female and minority applicants that make it to the civil service list. And then obviously to increase the number of female and minority applicants that we employ as police officers. So that's some of the goals of our current recruitment plan that we have in place. And then once we do a recruitment, we are required to do an annual recruitment analysis. So what we do is we go in and we break down all the numbers from our recruitment. How many applications do we have? How many minority applications do we have? How many female applications do we have? Where did we lose them in the process? How are we getting them to apply? Are we going to the right places to get them to apply? And if there's points in the process that we're losing female and minority applicants, how can we change our process, or can we change our process to eliminate that? So we break that down every year and we make adjustments. We just went through this process with Carla and Aaron, and we've made some adjustments to our next recruitment as far as the requirements for testing in that, in hopes of again, keeping our numbers up and getting the female and minority applicants onto our certified list. That's required in that policy. Oops, went a little too far there. Another policy that's important on this topic is our response to persons with mental illness. That policy helps us recognize the signs of mental illness. It lists out several things that may present themselves when you're dealing with somebody that has mental illness. The guidelines that officers and employees are to follow. If we are in a detention situation, it gives us guidelines on how to handle that. It talks us through voluntary and involuntary admissions for treatment to the hospital. It has a list of available resources that we can offer to individuals and families that are experiencing mental illness situations. And then it also goes through our training requirements that we require from our officers and employees on an annual basis on mental health and mental illness. And lastly, our complaint procedure process is another policy that we may consider codifying. It basically states all of our complaints will be accepted and investigated, to include anonymous complaints. So no more of this, hey, you have to come in here and fill out a form before we'll investigate your complaint, and you have to come in and do that in person. That's not how we operate. We'll take a complaint any way, shape, or form. It can be anonymous. It can be by the web. It can be a phone call. It can be anything, and we will investigate it. We don't even have to have a person's name that called it in. We don't require that information. If someone calls in and said an officer did something or an employee did something wrong, we're going to look into it, whether we can follow up with that person or not, because maybe they don't want to tell us their name because they're fearful of retaliation or something. So that's why we don't require them to give us their information unless they're willing to do so. It breaks down what the difference between a personnel complaint versus an internal affairs complaint. And just briefly, a personnel complaint are more of your minor, the officer was rude to me. The officer rolled through a red light. The officer was speeding. Your internal affairs complaints are more, the officer was stopped me because of the color of my skin. The officer used excessive force on me. The more serious stuff like that. The officer stole something from my house. Things like that would be an internal affairs complaint. And that policy breaks down those areas so we can categorize. It gives us disposition categories. So in other words, exonerated, unfounded, substantiated. It breaks down how each complaint will be, the possibilities of what that complaint will be, how it will be determined at the end of it. And then it also breaks down what disciplinary actions we can take. Everything from counseling to termination are covered. And then the notification requirements to the person that's complaining. If we do have their information, we are required by our policy to get back with them and tell them the results of the investigation and what we've come up with and whether it's founded, unfounded, or whatever. So we always get back to the person that complained to us and give them a disposition on their complaint. I would add, as I wrap this up, that this is a dangerous job that we're out there doing every day, and I don't want that to be lost on anybody. Officer Herrera was just buried in Lincoln on Saturday, was shot and killed serving a warrant in Lincoln, Nebraska a few days ago last week. Been 193 officers killed in the line of duty already this year. That's 46 higher than it was last year at this time. 243 officers killed by gunfire in the last 5 years, and that includes one of our own. So it's a dangerous job, and it's easy to sit back and be critical of the way things are done and to kind of project things that happen across the country on the officers of this department. But I think you all need to take a little bit of perspective when it comes to that, on how difficult the job can be at times. So with that, I'll take any questions that anybody has. Just in closing, I think it makes sense to potentially codify a couple of our policies, but I don't really, I guess I wouldn't be an advocate for codifying all of the CLIA standards or all of the policies that relate to the CLIA standards, as they cover a lot of mundane operational type activities that I don't think really fit the criteria of what we're trying to accomplish here. AJ, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, as Rob mentioned, if there's any questions, we covered an awful lot of material, and it's going to be respectful of everybody's time. So if there's any particular questions, Rob would be happy to answer those, particularly related to the CLIA process and what and the standards we hold ourselves to. As Rob mentioned, he and I have had a number of discussions on the potential codification, and I think it is important for us to, as Rob has identified, those ones that are the most important, the ones that are potentially, have received a lot of notoriety in the last several months, that we proceed with the process of codifying them. And what the codification does, it means it's city code, and that the only way those can be changed is through action by the city council. I was originally a proponent of taking the whole CLIA standards, but as Rob mentioned, there are things there that are really, they are operational, and they just really, it almost becomes burdensome to do all of that. But as they become, these are the most notable ones that we should be proceeding with the codification. And then again, as those changes come down from CLIA, and as we maintain that standard and we maintain that certification, those can certainly be changed at the council level, because we do that periodically with a number of our ordinances that get updated. currently you're going through a process of examination and update for our building code. That certainly has, there are codes and standards that are established every so often by the national building folks that communities adhere to. And that means there's a uniformity in that process. The CLIA offers that uniformity for those cities that take the time, energy, and effort to get accredited. But again, as Rob mentioned, those that he's identified, I think are probably the most important to bring into our system to codify. And you can certainly see that some communities have done that. They've identified some of those activities. And those are ones, even though we haven't codified them, those have been policies. Those have been practices and procedures that we've adhered to. So again, it just takes that another level of hopefully reassurance to the community that there are certain things, particularly those items which can be, could involve, like as the chief mentioned, use of force, how we deal with complaints, how we deal with those individuals, so we can promote an equal application when we deal with race and diversity in our community. I think those would be the most important ones for us to push out there for codification. So unless we hear any objections from council, we'll be working on bringing that forward to you. But again, would be happy to turn that back over to Rob for answering any questions that you may have.
Chief, just to clarify on CALIA, I mean, we went through and we're talking about the most important ones, obviously, are the that you highlighted as far as use of force and deadly force and chokeholds, and also on pretextual stops and those types of things. Those are, I mean, you also mentioned that there are some standards that are opt-out provisions. Obviously, I just want to clarify. I think I know the answer to this, but I just want to make sure we're clear on it. Is those types of the most important ones also are not opt-out provisions as far as being accredited with CALIA, correct? Those are universal among all agencies that are accredited by CALIA.
Right. So your optional standards, Mayor, are some of the more mundane stuff. So like I think, and I should have probably wrote down the 3 of the 88. There's 3 that we opt out of, and one of them is, I believe it's a personnel thing where you have to do every 3 years you have to go through and do a review of every single position within your department to make sure that their pay is properly adjusted, those kinds of things. But you're absolutely right. The main standards, use of force, pursuits, recruitment, retention, all those big areas, they are not opt out of. They are mandatory, required by every single agency of every single size. So that's where, again, I'd say that tier 1 that I talked about, where you can do the regular, the kind of the small, CALIA light is what the group kind of calls it as a joke. That 181 standards are like the meat and potatoes that everybody has to do. And those are all included in the advanced accreditation as well. But you're absolutely right, Mayor. All of the big ones, the use of force, all of those are all covered and mandatory for every single agency to be accredited.
I guess kind of a little follow up to that too is, so instead of, I get not taking all the standards and putting them in our code, but more if we, I guess, dummied it down to say our expectation is to have a CALIA certified police department. Is that easier than even pulling out these items that we've identified?
That's kind of where I was going at.
Yeah, and I discussed this with AJ, and I don't know how that's done. I just, because I'm naive to the ways of the city government a little bit on that end. But I would say probably the most important thing you could do is say, somehow take some type of council action to say that the Urbandale Police Department will be a CLIA accredited agency until you guys decide we're not going to be at some point. But yes, I agree. To require CLIA accreditation on the police department would be the most important action that you could take.
I just have one question. This is Ron. If we were to require CALIA accreditation, I know this will probably not happen under your watch, Chief, but what happens if you fail 1 year? Are you given a chance to correct it and reapply right away, or are you out for 2 years, or what happens then?
So if you go to the commission and they decide you're not going to be reaccredited, they normally, from what I've seen in the past, have given the agency an opportunity to present again in 6 months, correcting the errors of their ways, if you will. So they are giving them an opportunity to come back and represent, showing they've corrected the mistakes or the failures of their initial or their accreditation review. So that's what I've seen. I don't know exactly. I'm assuming at some point, yeah, they could just kick you out if you fail to do any of this stuff and just keep applying and putting it in front of them. But you're right. You would get an opportunity to go back. They set those parameters, and I think it's a case-by-case basis based on what your issues are. Sometimes it's just a specific standard that they see you lacking in, and they make you show proof of that within that certain time frame, usually a 6-month period. You got to show that you're coming in compliance on your use of force policy. Otherwise, we're not going. And then if you do that, we'll move you forward in accreditation. So, yes, I don't think it's an issue. And obviously, I will make sure it isn't an issue for us, but it does hold the feet to the fire.
Yeah, from a drafting standpoint, I'd just like to see if we're going to require an accredited police department, that we put in there that if they should lose accreditation, they have to do it in 6 months, or we have to take action at that point to do something with the police department in order to get accreditation. But I don't want everybody scrambling saying, we lost at one time, we can reapply in 6 months. What do we do in that time? It would be nice to think about that in advance and have it in the ordinance.
Hi, this is Bridget. I've got a few comments. While I think that Adam's suggestion of requiring, the CALIA certification, I think that we also need to be redundant and codify these issues that the chief laid out, the top issues or the top items, because I think it really shows our community, our commitment to these issues. And I don't think our community knows about CALIA. They don't know what it stands for. They don't know what it means. They don't really care. They care about these issues that the chief outlined. The people that get in the weeds, they understand and appreciate what we're talking about, but I want to be able to show and be proud of our community for having these things in our code that we require.
And as I've talked with AJ, I have absolutely no problem with codifying the policies. My only concern is we update them frequently. And how does that process work? I'm just a little naive on it when it comes to that. And maybe it's an easier process than I think. But I mean, it's not unusual. We review them annually as a CALIA standard, but I'm often updating our use of force. I'm often, with all these issues that came up this summer, there were several changes that I've already made to the policies immediately that were brought, specifically banning chokeholds. We never taught chokeholds here, but I never specifically listed it in the policy. Within a week, I was able to have that into the policy and clearly stated that, we ban chokeholds. I want to be able to continue to move swiftly on our policies and implementing them. And I don't want that part of it slowed down. And maybe that has no bearing whatsoever on, we just get to council whenever we can to get the next edition out there. I mean, AJ could speak more to that and how that would work and inform me.
I guess I think that's, great. And I think we meet frequently enough, and our legal team is able to turn stuff around quickly. I would think, AJ, because I want people to know that we're responding to issues, in real time in a week or whatever, I think that's to be attention to be brought to that we're making these changes. And so if we do have to update it once or twice a year, I don't think there's any issue with that.
Very quickly, Rob and I haven't gotten into a lot of the detail, but yeah, I think there is, because of the frequency of when you meet, because of the availability that the council has demonstrated over the years about emergency meetings if necessary, because of this format that we're using now, we can gather quickly. I think there's an opportunity to do so. At the same time, I don't think, and again, I want to get with Rob and with the city attorney to make sure that procedurally we don't miss anything, but I don't think it would prohibit Rob from making a change that makes the standards more stringent, if you will. That says, as the example given is that we don't use chokeholds, and given the light of all the activity, Rob came forward very quickly and to his credit said, we're not going to. This is not anything that we're going to do. I don't think that would prohibit him from doing that, and then for the council to reinforce that through a policy or through an ordinance change. But I'd want to, again, sit down with those. If this is the council is comfortable with that, I'd sit down with Rob and the city attorney, and we'd map out that process by which it does not tie Rob's hands from making appropriate changes that are, and just for lack of better words, the right thing to do, that keep us out of trouble and from keeping the officers from going the wrong direction.
I guess maybe I have a proposal maybe to cover both pieces of this. I understand that most residents don't understand what CALIA is and what it stands for and what the principles are. But what if we had some sort of what would cover this would be we outline it succinctly in whatever ordinance we have and say we support CALIA stands for these principles, among other things, stands for these other principles, and we highlight some of the more important ones that we are talking about now, and saying we as a council support and endorse these resolutions, and say that our department needs to maintain the CALIA certification because of these and other standards. Because I think, although they're the ones that we've highlighted are obviously very important and what our residents need to know about, there are certain other, as Chief said, they may be mundane, but they're certainly very important, and there's a reason for them to be in the CALIA certification, and there's a reason for us to have CALIA certification in the first place. So although there may be some ones that are probably more out in the forefront at this point, and that I'm glad that they're in the CALIA certification, there are other reasons to be CALIA accredited as well. So I guess I'd like to see something that highlights the ones that we've been talking about, but also says, we feel CALIA as a whole is important to our city.
I guess I'm not really understanding how that's different than having something that says we require our police department to be CALIA certified, and then also codifying these issues that the chief highlighted, or the standards that the chief highlighted. Are you saying you don't want to highlight those, or don't want to codify those?
No, I guess what I was saying is I did want to say that, but I also don't want to do it to the exclusion of saying that other parts of CALIA accreditation are important as well. That was my point.
I think we can do both easily. I think we can draft something up that basically states to the fact that we need to be a CALIA accredited agency, and that will be standing over time. And then we can also do the policies that I've noted there as well. I don't think it's a heavy lift to do either or both of those things. Honestly, I think we can.
Chief, you just muted. I think you muted yourself accidentally.
Okay, did you guys catch that? I thought we could do both. I think we can do both very easily. I think we can hit the CLIA, requirement that the department be CLIA accredited, speak to some of the reasons why that's important. And then we can also codify a few of those policies that I threw out there as well. I think we can do both, and it's not that heavy a lift.
All right. Well, we are well past our normal end time here, and I want to respect people's time. So why don't we? I guess AJ, we'll have you and the chief and Bob Layden work on something to come back to the council to review, and we can take it from there. That sound like-
AJ, I know that we're trying to wrap this to the council meeting, but I really would like to have a discussion about the situation with the mask wearing at the police department in relation to that specific event and a policy at larger policy.
The chief and I have had some discussions on that. Certainly, again, I want to be respectful of people's times. I can push something out in the weekly memo this week, and then that could we could set aside some time on Tuesday night for further discussion on that.
That sounds good.
I think that's good. Okay. Anything else for the go to the order today? No, can I get a motion and a second to adjourn?
This is Ron. I'll move to adjourn.
Adam, I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for your time today.
Thank you.